So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in person and those of you joining us on Zoom for our June Lunchtime Expedition presentation. My name is Korienko. If you have not met me yet, I am the curator here at the Draper Natural History Museum. Just a couple quick announcements. This one's going to go for myself as well. If you'd please take your mobile electronic cellular device and put that either on airplane mode or mute, that would be greatly appreciated, and our speaker would really appreciate that today too. As always, we are recording these lectures. If you've missed any presentation dating back to 2018, you can go to youtube.com, search Draper Natural History Museum, look for our bear icon. If you click on that, you'll have access to our presentations dating back to 2018. If you'd like to be added to our listserv every month, we send out a notice of upcoming presentations. Please come flag me down at the end. I will take down your name and email, and you'll start receiving upcoming notices of future presentations. Our next one is in July, and will feature Dr. Monica Turner. So you'll get an announcement about that. We have been fortunate to be able to offer these programs for free due to our sponsors, Sage Creek Ranch and the Nancy Carroll Draper Charitable Foundation. That has enabled us to bring speakers both close, regionally, as well as from far away. And we are able to offer these programs for free. If you do feel compelled to give to help keep these programs going or to expand them, there's multiple ways you can do that, so please come see me if you're interested as well in that. I'm going to shift now here into our upcoming presentation, but before I do, I know what's been burning on all of your minds here is the trivia questions. So, this young plant, or this plant is in its young leaf phenophase. What plant is it? Did anybody get this one? This is showy milkweed. What are the 3 R's of conservation biology? Well, if you remember from Joe Skorupski's presentation, it is representation, resiliency, and redundancy. And lastly, white bark pine only lives at higher elevations. This makes it what kind of a species? It makes it a specialist, generalist and specialist. It's a specialist species. So thank you for entertaining us here. We are now going to introduce our speaker for today. Today we will hear from Mr. David Haines. Haines has more than 20 years experience as a wildlife biologist and is currently Yellowstone National Park's bird program lead. He holds a bachelor's degree from California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo in ecology and systematic biology, and a master's degree from the University of Montana in wildlife biology, where he studied the breeding, ecology, and resource selection of golden eagles across Yellowstone's northern range. Haines has started working with golden eagles in 2003 on California's Channel Islands and has since worked with the species throughout many parts of the western U.S. His experience reaches well beyond golden eagles, however, and includes other raptors, waterfowl, shorebirds, and multiple guilds of songbirds. Haines has been affiliated with Yellowstone's bird program since 2011 and as an integral member of the Yellowstone Raptor Initiative. Since 2005, Haines has focused his efforts on developing research-based objectives for golden eagles in Yellowstone. When not working, Haines spends much of his time with his wife Dana, 2 young children, Henry and Wiley, and dog LD. David's research is also featured in our Monarch of the Skies exhibit, which you can find on the lower level of the Draper Natural History Museum. So if you haven't seen that exhibit yet, we really encourage you after this talk to take this research in context and visit that exhibit. And you can actually see a bunch of different research sites, one of which is David's that we're featuring here. So without further ado, please give Mr. David Haines a very warm welcome.
All right, thank you very much. My voice is recovering. If you can kind of maybe hear that scratch, I'm hearing it now that I'm being projected here. But anyways, yeah, thank you for coming. Thank you, Corey, for the introduction. I'm happy to be here. This is really, I feel like I'm in the middle of real eagle country here, and Chuck has done an amazing job really lifting the profile of golden eagles in this area. And Wyoming in general is just a very important place for the species. So today, I'm going to share with you guys some of our monitoring research that we've done in the park, and hopefully you find some of it interesting. So to start, as Corey mentioned, I work for the Yellowstone Bird Program, and we don't only focus on golden eagles. We focus on a lot of different species and even guilds of birds as well. We have long-term data on bald eagle, peregrine, and osprey, which was initially started because of DDT and the declines that were associated with that. For peregrines, we've actually watched the population resurge from no birds in the park at all to the current population. Bald eagles and ospreys, we've watched a population response to the introduction of lake trout in Yellowstone Lake. We're currently looking at owls across the northern range. We have a data set on trumpeter swans that reaches about 100 years now that shows the population increasing through up to about the 60s, and a decline that led until around 2010. And now we're on a resurge due to some of our management for the species. And then we're also looking at common loons, which is the rarest bird in Wyoming, small isolated population here in the GYE, and we look at songbirds across multiple environments such as willow riparian areas, old growth forests, and grasslands. But let's jump back into golden eagles. So I'm going to provide some background. I think, I'm sure some of you guys in this audience are somewhat familiar with some of the natural history of eagles, but I want to just provide some of this background as we move forward into some Yellowstone-specific things. So the species is an apex predator, top of its food chain, but more importantly, the species for a long time has been tied to human culture, and this is through spiritual beliefs, reverence, and unfortunately at times persecution. And I have some of these images I put up here, such as the Mexican flag coat of arms there and the Kazakhstan. You can see that these countries, amongst other countries, use the golden eagle as to represent as a representative animal. That drawing is of falconers from Kazakhstan from the 1800s, and I think most importantly for here in North America, where golden eagles overlap with Native Americans, the species is strongly tied to spiritual beliefs of a lot of these tribes. So the species in general has what we call a whole Arctic distribution. As you can see on this map on the right map here, the species occurs across most of North America, throughout Eurasia, and even some parts of northern Africa there. The species occupies a wide spectrum of environments. You can find it breeding at sea levels up into high elevations, even upwards of 9,000 to 10,000 feet, or maybe even higher. The use of these environments can vary across time and space. You wouldn't expect an eagle that's breeding at 10,000 feet to stay there throughout the winter. So they're quite adaptable to moving between these environments. Typically associated with open, rugged landscapes, not restricted to that by any means, but that's a very typical association for the species. We also think of them as cliff nesters and sometimes tree nesters, and that really is dependent on the substrate that's available. And if the food's there, a lot of times the birds will be there. So they'll use what they can, and sometimes they'll use anthropogenic resources like high tension power poles or even the ground at times. Preferred prey is medium-sized mammals and birds. They'll take prey as small as a gopher and as large as some small, medium-sized small ungulates. And commonly, some of the more well-recognized prey are things like rabbits, hares, and squirrels. They're also well known to scavenge carrion. So here in North America, the species is listed as a species of conservation concern, and this is in part due to some uncertainty in population trends. There has been some large-scale West-wide analyses that show a relatively stable population, but when you get down to these fine-scale studies, we see things like declines, we see stable, we even at times see increasing populations. More importantly, this designation of concern comes from the growing list of anthropogenic threats that we know are acting on the survival of the species. Some of these concerns involve energy development, and I think if you guys are from Wyoming, which I'm assuming a lot of you are, I'm sure you in the news you hear about the growing renewable energy development of wind and potentially the impacts that has on some of the avian wildlife and just not just birds, but bats and so forth. Oil and gas seems to be a big factor in limiting how many animals can occupy a space because of that ground disturbance. And also environmental contaminants are of growing concern. In general, human activity tends to be a problem for this species. Some individuals do well adapting, but in general, they tend to not really want to be too close to us. Some recent demographic analyses have shown that 63% of all golden eagle mortalities are human caused, which was quite concerning. And I'd say the good part about that is that we can recognize that and we can potentially mitigate for that in the future if people are motivated to do so. Another analysis showed that any additive mortality will cause declines or perhaps exacerbate declines that might already be going on. And this is a concern because, as I said, these known sources of that are fatal to these birds are growing, and they're not less. So that particular analysis, I think, really drew some concerns for me as well. Another big finding that happened only in the last year and a half or two was analysis of lead in bald and golden eagles, and this showed that about 50% of all bald and golden eagles in this country are exposed to have chronic exposure to lead. So throughout their lives, they're consuming lead multiple times or even one time and dying. But the point being that it's out there and they're finding it. So this was a little, this is another thing that maybe some of you guys in this audience are more familiar with, but I found this bit of information years ago, and it was a little concerning, and I've always been concerned about power lines. Electrocutions are quite common across bird species, but between 2007 and 2009, 232 golden eagles were killed here in Wyoming across, I can't remember how many counties, but along transmission lines, and so, that alone is something that we can work on fixing, but it is expensive and time consuming. And so hopefully we will get there one day, but because that kind of infrastructure is not going there, I know I need it. I need power. We all need power in this modern day. So when we hone it down to North America, the breeding distribution is most of Alaska, Western Canada, parts of Eastern Canada, the Western U.S., and those northern and western parts of Mexico. The species is considered a partial migrant, where around 55 degrees north latitude creates this kind of division where birds north of that tend to be a migratory species, or migratory individuals, and the birds below that tend to be resident year-round. And I will say that recent research has shown that they are more common in the eastern part of North America than previously thought. Most of that is wintering, as you can see on that map there in blue on the east. But there is some evidence of even some low levels of breeding in that part of the country. So golden eagle monitoring in Yellowstone started with the Yellowstone Raptor Initiative, and this was a 5-year effort to look at raptors in Yellowstone that previously were unmonitored. I mentioned the bald, golden eagle, and osprey, which we have those great long-term, nearly 40-year data sets on now. But none of these other birds had been represented. So we dove into birds. We kind of reached far first and thought we could look at kestrels and Swainson's hawks, prairie falcons, red tails, golden eagles. We can watch raptor migration through the park. And we did collect some of that data, but we did kind of have to hone it down, and we got down to red tails, golden eagles, and migration were really some of our best data. And what we found with golden eagles is, I'll get into some of what we found with golden eagles, but the primary objectives with golden eagles were to locate territories and to monitor occupancy and breeding after we had located these territories. And that was to be done annually for the next 5 years. A secondary objective was to try to get a baseline idea of what these birds are eating in Yellowstone. So what was their diet? So how did we find these eagles? What did we do? So this was primarily a ground-based effort. There was some early attempts to see if we could do some aerial surveys for these, but the landscape just didn't lend well to identifying golden eagle territories, finding nests against the backdrop of Yellowstone. So we set out on the ground, which I will say was the coolest part of the job by far. I myself and others, we got to just wander Yellowstone. That bottom left photograph is down in the southeast corner of the park. which is a very remote region. And we got to wander, and that was amazing. And we accomplished this by going to what we considered, where we expected to find eagles, looking for large cliffs adjacent to open areas. But we also did things like long sits, where we just find a big open space with a big vista, a big view, and we could try to find an eagle, follow that eagle, and hopefully that eagle could lead us to where maybe they might have a breeding territory. So once we found those territories, we wanted to monitor occupancy every year and reproduction. So are the birds present, and if they're present, are they reproducing? And this occurs, and it still is occurring, from late March through early August annually. And as you can see in that photograph in the upper right, when we hit the ground in some years, this year as well, we're dealing with a very wintry landscape. These birds are going down at a time when it's still very much winter in Yellowstone. That upper picture is, I think, early April one year, about probably 3 to 3.5 feet of snow. The tips of a few sagebrush sticking out there. And then you look at the transition as we're watching some of the reproduction, some of the nestling stuff in the bottom right there, where it's a beautiful green, wonderful landscape. So to look at eagle diet, we kind of approached this from two ways. And this, as I said, this was a secondary objective, so it really kind of is still kind of in its even to this day are still kind of limited in what we've found. And I will share some of that with you today. So between 2011 and 2016, we conducted prey collection by entering nest sites. And so we either rappelled down to the nest or ascended up into the nest, like you can see in that upper right picture of the tree nest there. And we collected all the prey remains that left in the nest. And we did this after the young had fledged. And so we already knew at that point you're only getting a limited view of what they're feeding their young, because some prey items are consumed completely, some prey items are removed from the nest by the adults. And so that was the best method we had to go about it at the time. And so once we collected all this stuff, all the prey remains were identified as well as species, and we tried to determine the minimum number of prey items that we recovered. Now in 2017, we conducted a pilot effort using cameras in the nests, and this is kind of something we're looking into doing more of. But this was the same situation: ascending into a nest, rappelling into a nest, installing these cameras when chicks were at least 3 weeks of age, when they can start to thermoregulate on their own. Adults are, unlike some raptors that might dive bomb you and maybe even hit you while you're at the nest, golden eagles are about self-preservation, and you generally just don't see them while you're in the nest. So here we're able to go through the photos, and with this method we're practically able to identify and quantify almost all prey items that are coming to the nest. So what did we find so far in Yellowstone? What did we see when we started some of this effort? So throughout the park, we found a minimum. To this date, we found a minimum of 30 territories, and by no means is that all the golden eagles in the park. But that's just the ones we have definitive nest sites, and we can define. There's plenty of other areas. I've seen the goldens. I believe they're there. I just haven't had the time to get to them. But of those 22, of these 30 territories, I want to point out, now that I've highlighted this area on the map on the right there, that 22 of these territories are located in the northern range of Yellowstone. And this is to be expected. This is the area of the park that most resembles where you might expect to find golden eagles. We have these lower valleys that have grassland, sagebrush steppe communities. The grassland, as you move up slope, you have more of this grassland communities interspersed with a lot of Douglas fir forest communities, as well as even some areas of spruce, subalpine fir and stuff. So, but what I want to point out is 22 territories in the northern range, and we're almost. We may have a couple more up there. That's nearly all of them, I believe. But that equates to is a density of approximately 45 square kilometers per occupied territory. And that, if you look at that range of 18 in North America of 18.5 to 252 square kilometers per occupied territory, we're at that, the higher end. And I guess I would say that when you start to look across study areas and stuff, we're kind of in that normal healthy zone where we expect to find golden eagles. Those extremes of 18.5 square kilometers, those are that environment in particular. That's the coast of California, and ground squirrels year round. I mean, there's just a prey base that you can't back down from. So that's why you end up with such high densities like that. So I will say that all territories in Yellowstone have been occupied in all years, which has been great. However, nest success, which is the percent of territories that fledge at least one young, and productivity, which is the total number of young fledged per occupied territory, have been low. And as you can see on that figure on the left with the year on the x-axis and productivity and success on the y-axis, you'll see that it's been highly variable year to year. A lot of times when you're looking at a graph like this for eagles, you might see more of a pattern. There's really no pattern here. And so beyond that, when you take the averages here of across these the last 12 years, you'll see that success is at 27% and productivity is at 0.32. And now when you're looking at a long-lived species like an eagle, they're always going to be low, and it's almost always going to be below 1 on average. Individual years you might see higher rates and stuff. But to give you some perspective, we are fortunate, one, to have a study area right here around Cody, and also to have a study area north of us near Livingston, Montana. And you can see that productivity in these areas, and these numbers are maybe a year or two old. I can't remember when I entered these numbers, but more than double what we're seeing in Yellowstone. So really, with having perspective of what we're seeing in this area and what we're seeing in the broad scale, and then what we're seeing in Yellowstone, it really raised questions on why we have a relatively high density and low reproductive rates, and that's something we'll come back to here shortly. So first, I think this is important to talk about some of what we found with the prey collection, because I think it will help lead into some of what we're talking about later here. Is that so with the prey collection from the nest, with rappelling in, standing up, collecting all the prey remains, we between 2011 and 2016, we entered 11 nest sites and identified 85 prey items that represented a minimum of 21 species. And if you see in red there, that yellow-bellied marmot was what stood out the most as any one single species, followed closely behind by dusky grouse. Other birds in general represented the largest portion of the diet, which was kind of stands out relative to what we know about the birds. I mean, I did mention they eat birds, but seeing a majority of the diet being birds kind of made us wonder a little bit. And I will say that the other mammals section there is kind of a range of anywhere from pocket gopher all the way up to ungulate fawns. And I should back up. That skull up there in the top right is a pine marten skull, which I just thought I was kind of excited when I found that one in there. So the nest cameras kind of tell a different story. Now this is only 2 nests, so I don't really want to compare this directly with the prey collection. But what we got back from this was from these 2 nests we identified 203 prey items, so more than double what we got from the prey collection of 11 nests. And from these 2 nests we identified a minimum of 12 species. By far, uinta ground squirrel you see there in red outweighed everything. They were all foraged on that, and birds made up a small portion of it in this analysis, and other mammals consisted of, again, marmot and I think only a couple rabbits and hares. And I will say that the prey collection previously, I don't think there was any rabbits at all collected in the nest of the collection. I will say that I have some data that I have not processed yet that from that I collected from the nest that did have maybe 1 to 2 more hares in it. So I put this up here just to kind of point out that and I kind of discussed that we see this ground squirrel, we see the ground squirrel stand out, we see marmot stand out, we see grass stand out, but we are missing that rabbit component, and I mentioned that because hares and rabbits tend to be a really important component to a lot of populations of golden eagles. Commonly, the most common prey here, Bighorn Basin is a great example of that. Cottontail has proven to be a driver here. They've published on it. They've shown amazing correlations with how they're reproducing in relationship to the abundance of these rabbits. They select for them disproportionately to their availability. when populations are low, they're still selecting for them at the best of their ability. And not just here, but many other study areas have shown that correlation with reproduction to abundance. Another part of the rabbits and hares' natural history is that they're available in winter. They don't hibernate like a lot of the other small mammals that these animals are preying on. So it's providing a maybe not always reliable, but a very nutritious food source at a time when food can be very low. Now in Yellowstone, we actually do have 4 species of rabbit snares. We have desert cottontail, we have mountain cottontail, and we have snowshoe hare and white-tailed jackrabbit. But for the snowshoe hare, they've been described as a acyclic, patchily distributed population. So they're only golden eagle. Not all golden eagles are even overlapping with where they are. And for the cottontails and the jackrabbits, they're really restricted. I mean, their range is really almost, if you guys know Yellowstone, kind of the Mammoth Hot Springs area down through Gardner. And beyond that, I've seen one live jacktail rabbit, white-tailed jackrabbit, on the Blacktail Plateau, about 5 or 6 miles west of Yellowstone once. So, and I think for any of us that walk around landscapes a lot, when rabbits are there, usually spot them here and there. So I feel confident that they're just not abundant in Yellowstone. So that leads us to carrion, and this resource can be very important, but the importance of this resource does vary across the species range. So it's, as I'm getting at here is really dependent on the availability of other prey and these winter conditions that influence food availability. So coming back to that question, why is density high and reproductive success low in the northern range of Yellowstone? Now, I wish I could just be like, here we go, here's the science, here's why. But unfortunately, we have no data on golden eagles prior to 2011. And so we found golden eagles in the state they're in. And so I can't say all the reasons why we've reached this state, but here we are. So we're kind of left to speculate upon our hypotheses that surround this question. And so one of those hypotheses surrounds carnivore recovery. And when I say carnivore recovery, I mean wolf reintroduction, grizzly bear increase, the recolonization of cougars. And so what I want to get at here is that the northern Yellowstone elk herd prior to this numbered anywhere from 19 to maybe even 25,000 individuals. This figure I have here shows around 18, 19, but other estimates show upwards of 25,000 individuals, which is really an overabundant elk herd. And this elk herd would commonly experience these considerable winter die-offs as a result of limited resources in winter. And the timing of these die-offs that occurred happened around the time eagles are initiating their nesting behavior. And so this presumably provided a reliable food source for these eagles at a much needed time. Now, as we've reached kind of an equilibrium with the predators and the prey base, the population is somewhere between 6,000 to 8,000 individuals of elk these days, and these winter die-offs just don't happen commonly. I can say this year was a different year, and we can maybe talk about that later. But we had a lot of die-off this year. But overall, what's left is carnivore contributed carrion, and it just may be that carnivores aren't producing enough food for these eagles to be successful or to reproduce at a higher rate. And so this density might be this historical relic of this once abundant food source, and low reproduction may be this response to this decrease in food and availability. Another action that happened that really almost is kind of more new to us, actually. I hate to say, I don't know how this eluded us for so long, but back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot of depredation of sheep up in Dillon, Montana. And so there was a big effort to capture and relocate golden eagles to manage for this depredation. And to our surprise, 249 golden eagles were released into Yellowstone National Park between 1976 and 1982. And now I will say that There is some data on relocation of birds, and when you're dealing with adult birds, they typically are going to return back to where they're from. And so I don't expect that any adults that may have had a breeding territory that were released in Yellowstone remained in Yellowstone. And I really don't know. I don't know if any of these birds were in Yellowstone, but they were releasing all age classes at a time of the year where squirrels were out. And so it's hard to say if that had any impact on increasing the population of eagles in the park. But as I said, this is all stuff we have to speculate on. We don't have the data. I have requested the band data from all these birds from the bird banding lab, and I hope to kind of get some idea of where some of these birds ended up after they were relocated. And I'm still kind of just waiting on that data to look at that. So let's dive into what we have been able to try to answer in Yellowstone, and I'm going to focus on this question in particular for the rest of the talk. And that is, what components of golden eagle habitat in the northern range of Yellowstone National Park influence reproductive success? So I mentioned habitat, and I think just for clarity, I want to define habitat here. It's somewhat of a debated ecological theory, and so just for clarity, I'm defining habitat here as a species-specific resources and conditions present in an area that drives occupancy, survival, and reproduction. So what I'm saying there is that when you look across a landscape, you're looking at a mosaic of habitats unique to each species out there. Lots of overlap in what they're using, but habitat is species specific. And now I will say that conservation research tends to want to look at habitat across a gradient of quality, because habitat, there's not just great habitat. There's a whole low to high quality, and so we're typically looking to measure the effects of habitat on things like survival and reproduction, and so looking across that gradient of habitat quality is important to conservation. So factors that drive reproductive success, not just with eagles, but in general, things like food availability and the weather conditions that the animals experience. And I will say that it's well established that golden eagles just don't breed in every year, and this is presumably due to female eagles not meeting those conditional requirements for egg laying. But additionally, long-lived species like the golden eagle, I should say long-lived species in general it's suggested that they have a fixed level of investment in their young in order to maximize their own survival. So you always have that chance to breed again. And so they'd rather survive and live another year instead of working so hard to get that young off if the resources aren't correct for them in that given year. And things like nest failure, which is something we see quite a bit in Yellowstone, is usually a factor of inclement weather often interacting with food availability. And this can exert itself as indirectly, say like through weather events that are limiting limiting the activity of prey, or limiting the ability of the predator to effectively hunt that prey. And also the direct effects would be something like extreme weather events that might have a direct effect on, say, the nestlings, or something that's just pushing that bird, the incubating bird, off the nest to an extreme. Those are less understood than these indirect effects. So when we take our data, I'm not going to get into any scientific modeling here or anything like that, but this is kind of the groundwork for how we kind of approach this study. And so we kind of thought about eagles existing in individual states in any portion of the year. And so all eagles in the middle of winter are in a non-breeding state. And you get to springtime and you have a mate, and you either choose to breed or not breed. And so they either move to that breeding state, and if they move to that breeding state, they're either going to be successful or they're going to fail. And so when you look at our data, what we found was that there's a 32% probability that an eagle will breed in a given year. That means that there's almost a 70% probability that eagles are just not going to breed in Yellowstone in a given year. Now, if they breed, there's about a 60% probability that they'll be successful, and that means about a 40% probability that you're going to fail. So what we wanted to look at was how the weather these eagles experience and the resources available to them influence that probability that they will breed, and if they breed, that probability that they will be successful. So we had to kind of figure out what we thought might be important weather-wise, what factors of weather might be influencing this, and so we took into consideration precipitation, temperature, snow, and we looked at this across 3 time periods. So we were interested in how the winter weather that they're experiencing through winter is influencing the probability that they'll lay eggs. And then we looked at how the weather they're experiencing in that late winter, early spring period, around the time that they're initiating their nesting, would influence egg laying or success, as well as how whether they're experiencing during the incubation period, might be influencing success. And so kind of getting at that, trying to dig into a little bit, trying to find that maybe if there's some direct effects there. And so with some of that weather data, we also derived weather events such as prolonged precipitation events and severe weather events that incorporated both low temperatures and high precipitation. For resources, I wish I could say we had data on small mammal populations, but we don't. And so we had to consider other factors. And so one thing we used was topographical variables. These were intended to kind of look at how. Let me back up here. Topography really aids in the updraft for eagles to fly on. So essentially, when you have more updrafts, whether it be thermal updrafts or orographic updraft, this is going to allow the eagles to conserve energy while they search for prey. Now, because as I said, I didn't have prey base, I used things like vegetative cover to consider as a consideration of as a kind of a proxy for prey. This is things that support the prey that these eagles are selecting for. To address how carnivores may be contributing to this, I use estimates of what I'm calling wolf kill biomass. And this was really what it was, and this was taken from the Yellowstone Wolf Project. This is the amount of biomass acquired per wolf per day. And so this was to serve as an index of carnivores contributed carrying on the landscape. And finally, I used nearest neighbor distances, and this is the proximity of eagles nesting to each other. And this was to address the prediction that eagles nesting in closer proximity to each other are occupying areas of higher quality habitat. All this was looked at the scale of the home range. And so home range behavior is this presumed decision-making process that is there to ideally increase the contributions of resources that are spatially spread across the landscape. And in the end, those resources that they're searching for and the higher quality of those would then hopefully be represented as represented in their reproductive rates. I want to define home range again, just to be clear here. This is I'm calling this the area that's routinely used by an animal to meet its daily needs. And for a raptor, that's the restricted area with the hunting range and their defended territory. I will say that, let me define territory for you, because sometimes these two terms I even tend to use them almost the same. Sometimes I try not to. But territory is the area that contains one or more nests within the home range. And home ranges vary temporally or across time. In a given year, in winter, a home range is going to be, on average, much larger than you're going to see in the summertime. And so in the summer, a territory and a home range are, a lot of times, based on observations, I'd say nearly equal. Whereas during the winter, these eagles are not defending out to the edges of their home range. They may still defend at that central point, but beyond that, not really. And another factor here is that of why we wanted to look at this scale is that in general, some territories or home ranges, I'm going to use territory here, are just more productive than others, suggesting that there are these quality differences between home ranges. And so I'm not going to get too much into any of our capture work or anything like that today, but we did use some of that for this analysis. And so we've captured eagles. We're still capturing eagles here, and using that data, we're able to develop estimates of home ranges. And you can see in that map on the bottom left there that there's a lot of variation across birds, but at this time of year, it's actually much less than if I were to show you how it varies in winter, you'd see it's quite different. So it averaged about 32 square kilometers, and so what we did was we took that average and we placed that average, an estimated average around every territory center, which was either a single nest of the site, if that's all they had, or if they had multiple nests, we used kind of the geographic center of those nests. And so because we don't have every bird tagged, if we had every bird tagged, I would have just used the home range data that we had, but you kind of have to use what you have. So we did that, and we placed that, and then we extracted, from those areas, we extracted the landscape data and things like weather and things from there. And here's some of what we found. And so what we found for how things in winter have influenced the probability that these birds are going to lay their eggs. I will say that we didn't find a whole lot there. We did find that the number of occasions with precipitation on 3 or more days did have a negative influence on the probability that these birds are going to lay eggs. So for every occasion that snow occurred on consecutive days of 3 or more, for every time that occasion occurred, the probability of success, probability of egg laying decreased. For factors influencing breeding success, we did find a bit more here, fortunately. We didn't find any effect of that incubation period. There was, all variables showed no effect at all. But for that period of time, that what we called the late winter, early spring period, that period when they're laying eggs, we found multiple weather factors that seemed to be influencing reproduction. One of which was snow. Years where snow persisted on the ground longer into the year, the probability of success decreased. This is in part likely due to the fact that this may delay the emergence of things like ground squirrels. That as this time of year comes on, these birds are switching from carrion to more of a live prey base, and carrion's decreasing, prey bases, and so in those years where those aren't there, when the snow is persisting, it may be delaying that. It also just may be creating that cover for those animals and not allowing for the eagles to detect them very well. Another thing we saw was that for just like the prolonged precipitation events, for every additional severe weather event that happened in this time period, the probability of success decreased. And again, I can't say if there was direct effects there or indirect. I lean more on the idea that during these events, these birds are unable to hunt. The prey is likely not moving much, and that's limiting the amount of resources that can get to that incubating female or get to maybe those really very young chicks. We really only looked at a window that maybe touched the edge of hatch. So beyond that, we found no effects, as I said, from the weather from that time period. Now we did find some positive effects of the landscape. We found that home ranges with more rugged terrain had a higher probability of success. And as I said earlier, eagles are, with the updrafts that are formed in these areas, eagles are able to conserve energy while they hunt. And so, that generally made sense. And when you look at the selection analysis that I've done on with our data, they're strongly selecting for rugged areas. Many other studies have shown the exact same thing. So it's good to see that there's a positive effect of something they're selecting for there. I did not find any effect of vegetative cover, so I didn't find any effect of say sagebrush, increased amount of sagebrush steppe area within the home range. And so, I just don't think that served as the greatest proxy for prey availability. We did find, and I want to say that the effects of these were a little weaker than those weather effects. Those weather effects really outweighed everything here. But we did find support for birds that are nesting in closer proximity to each other having a higher probability of success, which then does support the prediction that territory density, reproductive success, and the aggregation of resources are potentially interacting there. For wolf kill biomass, I found no influence on the breeding with this metric. I will say that I used an annual average and blanketed that across all territories. So it lacked that spatial variations that I was going for with the home range analysis. So it may be that eagles are strongly benefiting from these, but it gets washed out when you look across all territories. And additionally, wolves have the ability to consume all their prey, and so it doesn't really represent what was truly available for those animals. So overall, the study has advanced our understanding of these low reproductive rates. We see that the harsh weather these animals experience during winter and specifically during that egg-laying period have a lasting effect on if they're going to be successful or not in a given year. We did find some positive influence of the resources that are within their home ranges, and I think that this is me kind of reaching a little bit with it, but I'm basing this off of other research that I think that overall this is suggesting prey limitation. Some great research out of Idaho, which you can see here in the exhibit here, showed a strong positive relationship of jackrabbit abundance to breeding success, and they showed a negative. Like what we saw they saw negative effects with winter severity. But the one part of this study that really stood out to me is this study used 30 plus years of data, and they were only able to detect that effect of weather when jackrabbit abundance was low. So as they state, they would never have identified the effect of weather if it wasn't for the time frame of the study. So I think overall that's kind of what I feel that we're looking at here. And when you look at what we've seen with prey and so forth, that really seems to be a limiting factor. Now there are consequences to these low reproductive rates. I've done kind of a bit of a simple analysis of what the population, of the stability of that local population in Yellowstone is, and we use a term called lambda, and lambda of 1 is a stable population. Anything above 1 is a growing population. Anything below 1 is potentially a declining population, and the mean was right around 1 at 0.98. But if you look at that credible interval to the right there, we're as low as 0.92 to right around stable. For this, I don't have any survival. I don't have enough data to estimate survival of birds in Yellowstone yet. We're building that data set with our transmitter work, and so that's a growing data set that I hope to incorporate here. So what I used was large scale estimates of survival for these animals, and so that I'm losing a little resolution there by using a broad scale analysis of survival versus what's happening there. So, in general, if we have a stable population, that's great. Other than that, the populations stay always, it's 100% occupied every year, and I've seen losses of birds. And so I know they're always being replaced. So it may be that we're just dependent on birds immigrating into the park on a regular basis. So as I mentioned, researching these other life history stages, primarily adult survival, which is really the primary driver of population stability, but as well as things like juvenile survival would be really important to really understanding the demographics of the species in Yellowstone. Environmental contaminants is an area that we've also kind of are trying to collect data on. This eagle here was the first eagle we captured in Yellowstone. It died of lead poisoning shortly after spending much of the big game hunting season north of the park. It came back to the park and died shortly after. And we collected it, sent it to a lab, and came back with critical levels of lead in its system. And also, as I said, we want to dive deeper into the diet. One thing we always are faced with eagle research is that understanding diet beyond the breeding season is really difficult. I will say we're fortunate in Yellowstone to have multiple studies all doing concurrent tracking efforts. And so currently I'm working with Wolf and Cougar Project to look at how golden eagles the use of golden eagles to known and predicted wolf and cougar kills on the landscape. And so that's hopefully something that we'll be able to work. We're still gathering our data there, but we've preliminarily looked at some of that, and you can see that there is proximity of use to these areas. So with that, I'm happy you guys all got to hear my talk here, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Yep.
Is there any indication that those birds in the northern range winter maybe out in the Bighorn Basin or north of Fort Livingston?
So I can tell you that the birds I tracked do not. They winter on, they spend the whole winter on their territories. I shouldn't say the whole winter on the territories, but they spend their whole winter at the northern edge of the park. They use the Gardner area a lot. Gardner provides a lot of carrion, whether it be natural or the fact that there's hunting out there pretty much through the entire winter. So the use of that area is not. But I will say that I did capture an eagle. Oh, I did forget to ask. I forgot to repeat the question for the audience online. That do the birds in the northern range migrate out of the northern range and use the areas such as the Bighorn Basin here, and maybe other areas further south? And the answer was no. But I did capture a bird on. I was targeting one bird. You end up with the wrong bird. You put a transmitter on, and you learn a lot. This one particular bird breeds in the interior of the park. An area with essentially no prey in the middle of winter. And that bird really exhibited some really, and actually, surprisingly enough, I actually have the slide right here. That one on the right there, that bird 2 winters in a row traveled down through, all the way down into New Mexico, Arizona and back. And then in the third winter, it actually only spent its winter in the kind of lander area and stuff like that, and now the transmitter stopped working, unfortunately. So I was really having a good time watching that bird, even though it really wasn't contributing to my main research. I would like to know a lot more about these interior birds of Yellowstone. Yeah, Chuck.